Silence can heal, but it can also destroy. It can be the calm before a storm or the strength that holds a storm back. The question is, do you know which kind of silence is shaping your life? Some silences are born from discipline, from the ancient wisdom of Stoicism, where a man like Marcus Aurelius chose stillness over chaos. Other silences come from manipulation, from the cold strategies of narcissism, where withdrawal is a weapon designed to confuse and control. Every day you face both kinds, whether in your relationships, at work, or even inside your own thoughts. One silence teaches you to master yourself, the other traps you in doubt and insecurity. The difference between the two can decide whether you stand strong or collapse under invisible pressure. That's why this journey matters. Understanding this battle is not about abstract philosophy or theory. It's about survival. It's about reclaiming the strength to know when silence is protecting you and when silence is being used against you. Narcissistic silence keeps you guessing, doubting, apologizing for things you never did. Stoic silence, on the other hand, sets you free by teaching you that no insult, no attack, no external chaos can disturb your inner fortress unless you let it. Before we move forward, share with me where you are watching this from, your city and your country. Let's see how far this reflection on silent power can reach across the world. Because once you learn to distinguish between silence that builds and silence that destroys, you'll never experience a quiet moment the same way again. The ancient roots of silent power. The story of silent power begins long before modern psychology. The Stoics of ancient Rome saw silence not as emptiness, but as a discipline, a way of ruling the self when words could only worsen the storm. Marcus Aurelius wrote that you always remain stronger when you master the impulse to answer every provocation. Epictetus taught that the measure of a person's freedom is their ability to stay unmoved by insults, choosing silence over reaction. This silence was never weakness. It was strength disguised in restraint. To remain calm when others lose control is to hold a kind of authority that no one can take away. Imagine the battlefield, not of soldiers, but of arguments and egos. The one who answers with anger loses ground, while the one who answers with measured silence often wins without striking. That is the power the Stoics cultivated. Now compare it to the silence that wounds. Throughout history, silence has also been used to punish and manipulate. It appears in broken families, in cold rulers who withdraw affection to dominate, in the silent treatment that makes the victim question their own worth. Here, silence is not a shield, but a weapon. It is not chosen for peace, but inflicted for control. The difference lies in intent. Stoic silence is the mountain unmoved by wind or storm. Narcissistic silence is the frozen wall, built to isolate and weaken. One invites reflection, the other breeds confusion. One is rooted in mastery of self, the other in domination of others. Psychologically, this difference is enormous. Silence rooted in calm can heal the nervous system, lower conflict, and invite peace. Silence rooted in malice can trigger anxiety, make the mind restless, and break trust. One connects you deeper to yourself. The other makes you feel abandoned and invisible. Think of the imagery. The silence of the Stoic is the stillness of a clear lake at dawn, reflecting truth without distortion. The silence of the narcissist is the silence of a locked door, behind which you are left pounding for answers that never come. One nourishes, the other starves. Ancient thinkers understood that not every silence was equal. The silence of a sage was revered. The silence of a manipulator was feared. This distinction is as relevant today as it was centuries ago, because silence is still shaping the way you live, love, and trust. But silence is not only history. It is alive right now, moving through your relationships, your workplace, even your inner world. And if you don't learn to recognize its roots, you may find yourself trapped in the wrong kind of quiet. Stoic silence, the fortress within. Stoic silence is not an escape, but a discipline. It is the art of holding back the unnecessary word, the impulsive reaction, the sharp answer that would only make the fire grow. Marcus Aurelius often reminded himself to pause, to breathe, to let anger pass like smoke before speaking. That pause was not weakness. It was the ultimate expression of power. the power to choose. In daily life, this silence becomes a fortress. It shields you from the chaos of others because it reminds you that you are not responsible for their storms. Epictetus taught that it is not events that disturb us but our interpretation of them. Silence becomes the gap where interpretation can be reshaped. Instead of reacting to insult with rage, you sit in silence long enough to realize the insult cannot touch your worth. Carl Jung described individuation as the process of becoming whole, of meeting the shadow within. In silence, this process begins. You confront not only the noise of others, but the noise inside yourself, the old voices of shame, fear, and self-doubt. By choosing silence, you do not run from them, you face them. In that stillness, you begin to understand yourself. Picture a lighthouse standing alone against crashing waves. It does not argue with the sea. It does not curse the storm. It simply stands, silently casting its light. That is Stoic silence, a steady presence that does not need to shout to be powerful. When insults or rejection strike, silence gives you the upper hand. It breaks the pattern that toxic people rely on. They expect your reaction, your explosion, your collapse. Instead, you give them nothing, and in that nothing, they lose their power. This silence does not mean passivity. It is active, deliberate, intentional. It is the training ground where you practice mastery over yourself. By not reacting, you learn that your mind belongs to you, not to the chaos outside. That realization is liberation. The practical lesson is simple yet difficult. Pause. Before you answer, pause. Before you defend, pause. In that pause, you choose whether you will let their storm enter your fortress. Yet not all silence is born of wisdom. Some silence is designed to make you question yourself, to leave you powerless in uncertainty. And that kind of silence is not stoic at all. It is the silence of manipulation, and it is a trap. Narcissistic silence, the invisible cage. There is another kind of silence, and it feels very different from the calm presence of Stoicism. This is the silence of manipulation, the silence that comes not to protect, but to punish. Narcissists wield it like a blade, cutting off connection to control the narrative. It is not the pause of wisdom, but the withdrawal of affection, designed to make you beg for answers that never come. This silence is not neutral. It is a strategy. When a narcissist refuses to speak, it is not because they seek peace, but because they know their silence keeps you off balance. You begin to replay every word you said, every action you took, wondering what you did wrong. In truth, their silence has little to do with you. It is about power. The silent treatment is one of their most effective weapons. It makes you question your worth. It forces you to chase after them, apologizing for imagined offenses. In relationships, it feels like a wall suddenly built between two people, one pounding on the door for connection, the other standing behind it, listening, unmoved. Psychologically, this silence eats away at stability. It generates anxiety, self-blame, and confusion. Unlike Stoic silence, which invites reflection, narcissistic silence starves you of clarity. It leaves you in the dark, grasping for meaning, always a step behind. That is why it is so damaging. Imagine a mirror that shows no reflection. You look, and there is nothing. That is the essence of narcissistic silence. It denies your existence. It tells you without words that you do not matter. Over time, this corrodes trust and makes you dependent on their next word, their next gesture, their next sign of approval. This silence can be harder to fight than open aggression because it is invisible. Others may not even notice it happening. To the outside world, it looks like calm. But inside, it feels like abandonment, like being trapped in a room where the air is slowly running out. The tragedy is that many confuse this silence with strength, mistaking manipulation for self-control. But it is not strength. It is fear disguised as control, insecurity masked as power. True silence needs no victim. False silence cannot survive without one. So how can you recognize in the moment which silence is in front of you? That is the next step, because awareness alone can save you from walking willingly into the invisible cage. The psychology of perception. Silence is never just the absence of words. It is a message in itself. But what that message means depends on how we perceive it. Human beings are wired to interpret silence, often filling the void with stories of our own making. When someone says nothing, we project meaning onto the quiet. We assume it signals rejection, wisdom, anger, or disapproval. And in that projection, we often deceive ourselves. The Stoics warned against this very trap. Epictetus taught that events themselves are neutral. It is our judgment that gives them power. When someone falls silent, we rush to interpret it through our fears. Did I make a mistake? Did I upset them? Do they no longer care? This internal dialogue can spiral into anxiety, but the silence itself has not changed. Only our interpretation has. Narcissists know how to exploit this. They weaponize ambiguity, relying on your need for answers to keep you off balance. Their silence becomes a mirror in which you see your insecurities reflected back at you. The more you try to decode it, the deeper you sink into confusion. This is why their silence feels like rejection, even when no word is spoken. Stoic silence, in contrast, does not demand that you guess its meaning. It is transparent in its intent, a pause to reflect, a refusal to escalate, a deliberate choice to remain grounded. It is not meant to punish, but to preserve. You can feel the difference because Stoic silence leaves you calmer, while narcissistic silence leaves you restless. Carl Jung spoke of the shadow, the hidden parts of ourselves that emerge in moments of silence. When you sit in true stillness, your shadow surfaces and you confront the parts of you that are usually drowned in noise. This confrontation brings growth. But when silence comes from manipulation, the shadow is not your own. It is theirs, cast over you, making you carry a burden that was never yours to begin with. The key lies in pausing to ask, what is the intent behind this silence? Is it building peace, or is it sowing doubt? Does it invite me to grow, or does it trap me in fear? By asking these questions, you reclaim control over your perception instead of letting silence dictate your emotions. Awareness breaks the cycle. When you recognize silence for what it is, you stop feeding it with stories that only hurt you. You see it clearly, a fortress or a cage, a tool of peace or a weapon of manipulation. But awareness is only the first step. Once you see the difference, the real challenge is learning how to respond. And that requires tools strong enough to turn silence into your ally instead of your enemy. Tools of the Stoic. When faced with silence, your first instinct may be to react, to fill the void with explanations, defenses, or anger. But the Stoic chooses another path. The first tool is the pause. By delaying your response, you interrupt the automatic chain that toxic people depend on. The pause gives you space to decide rather than to be dragged into someone else's storm. Journaling is another weapon of clarity. Seneca often advised writing to himself as a way of clearing the fog of emotion. When silence unsettles you, take the thoughts circling in your mind and put them on paper. Words written privately strip silence of its mystery. Instead of drowning in unspoken fears, you transform them into reflections you can examine. Meditation trains the same muscle. 5 minutes of focused breathing builds resilience against the anxiety silence can provoke. In that stillness, you teach your mind that calm is a choice available at any moment. This practice builds an inner refuge that manipulation cannot easily breach. Detachment is also essential. Epictetus said we suffer more in imagination than in reality. When a narcissist withdraws, they want you to imagine 1,000 wrongs you never committed. Detachment reminds you that their silence belongs to them, not to you. It is their tool, their projection, their choice, not your burden to carry. Boundaries must then follow. A Stoic does not allow repeated manipulation. Boundaries may be as simple as refusing to chase after someone who withholds communication. By holding your position, you demonstrate that your worth does not depend on their attention. That boundary transforms silence from a prison into a test, one they can no longer pass. Sometimes silence itself is the strongest answer. When accusations are baseless or provocations designed to trigger, your silence speaks louder than defense ever could. It communicates that you are not available for games. This is not surrender, it is strategy. Over time, these tools build a new identity. You become less reactive, more reflective, less controlled, more in control. Your silence begins to carry weight, not as punishment but as presence. Others notice it. They may even fear it because they cannot manipulate someone who no longer flinches at silence. And yet, even with these tools, the narcissist thrives if you continue to believe their silence is your fault. Breaking that spell is the next and most urgent step, because until you do, their power will always find a way back. Breaking the narcissist's spell. The silence of a narcissist works only as long as you believe you are the problem. The first step in breaking the spell is to refuse that lie. Their withdrawal is not proof of your failure, it is evidence of their strategy. Once you see this, the power of their silence begins to fade. Do not beg for words, this is the trap they set, drawing you into a chase that validates their control. Instead, hold your ground. Value your presence. Remind yourself that you are not defined by their refusal to communicate. Every time you resist the urge to plead for answers, you reclaim a piece of your dignity. Reclaiming your narrative is the next step. Narcissistic silence whispers, "You are guilty." Your counter is to affirm, "I am not defined by someone else's silence." This shift is not just mental, it is practical. You stop rearranging your life around their moods, and you begin to live by your own clarity. When the silence comes, respond with calm clarity instead of collapse. Say, "I will not participate in this kind of communication." Or simply remove yourself from the game by focusing on what strengthens you instead of waiting for what weakens you. These small actions communicate louder than any argument could. Recognize the patterns. A narcissist's silence always follows the same rhythm: provoke, withdraw, control, return. By seeing the cycle, you stop being its prisoner. You no longer take each episode personally. You see it as the repetition of an old script that you refuse to act in. Distance becomes your shield. You do not need to sever ties instantly, but you do need to step back. Physical distance, emotional space, even the decision not to respond right away. These are forms of freedom. With each step, you break the illusion that their silence dictates your worth. Self-esteem grows when you stop giving their silence power. You begin to see it for what it is: emptiness disguised as authority. And once you see the emptiness, it loses its grip. The spell is broken, and in its place, your own presence rises stronger. I'd love to know, from which country or city are you watching this? Your perspective adds depth to this reflection, showing how silence shapes lives differently across the world. Now let's see how these two paths, Stoic silence and narcissistic silence, lead to completely different destinies. Two roads, two destinies. Every silence carries you down a road, and those roads could not be more different. The Stoic road is marked by clarity, resilience, and freedom. It is the silence that allows you to think before you act, to rise above insults, to preserve your energy for what truly matters. Walking this road, you become unshaken, because your peace no longer depends on the noise of others. The narcissist's road, however, is lined with confusion and doubt. Their silence leaves you second-guessing yourself, replaying conversations in your mind, apologizing for things you never did. This road slowly erodes your confidence until you mistake manipulation for love and control for care. Step too far down this path, and you wake up a stranger to yourself. Picture two landscapes. The first is a garden of silence, where stillness nourishes the soul, where flowers bloom because no storm is allowed to uproot them. The second is a desert of silence, where the absence of water mirrors the absence of truth, where life withers because every drop of connection is withheld. Both are silent, but one gives life while the other drains it. The Stoic silence leads to psychological freedom. It frees you from being enslaved by reactions, teaching you that external chaos cannot dictate your inner state. The narcissist's silence leads to psychological slavery. keeping you chained to their moods, waiting for the smallest sign of acceptance. Choice becomes the dividing line. Do you build silence into a fortress that protects your mind? Or do you let silence become a cage designed by someone else's insecurity? The difference is not in the silence itself, but in who controls it. When you practice Stoic silence, you choose mastery of self. When you fall into narcissistic silence, you surrender mastery to another. One is the path of strength, the other, the path of erosion. This moment right now is an invitation to step off the desert path and enter the garden. To see that the power of silence is always yours to claim if you decide it belongs to you. But the true question is, can silence transform your life starting today? The answer depends on how you use it in the moments that test you most. Practical application. Silence in daily life. The true measure of silent power is not found in theory but in practice. It shows up in the workplace, where meetings overflow with voices competing to be heard. The Stoic learns that sometimes the most powerful statement is no statement at all, letting silence draw attention to what truly matters. Leaders who master silence command more respect than those who rush to fill every pause. In relationships, silence becomes a test. Families, partners, and friends all use quiet in different ways. A moment of calm after conflict can be a chance to reset, to breathe before saying something that cannot be taken back. But when silence turns into withdrawal, the warning is clear. Boundaries must be set. Recognizing the intent behind silence allows you to protect your heart without losing compassion. Personal growth thrives in silence. Journaling at dawn, meditating before the noise of the day begins, or spending time without distraction creates a discipline of clarity. It is in these moments that self-mastery is forged. The mind, unclouded by constant noise, begins to see itself clearly. This is the silence that builds resilience. The art of the pause transforms everyday conflicts. Before answering criticism, you wait. Before sending that impulsive message, you breathe. In the pause, your reaction shifts from instinct to choice, from weakness to strength. The world notices this difference even if it cannot name it. Role-play the contrast in your mind. Picture yourself in front of someone hurling accusations. In one scenario, you react, you defend, you escalate. In the other, you remain calm, silent, composed. The second version unsettles them, because they cannot control what they cannot provoke. That is the silent power Stoicism trains. Silence should never be mistaken for retreat. True silence is an active force, a decision not to waste energy where it does not belong. It is not hiding but holding, not weakness but direction. When you use silence deliberately, it shapes outcomes more effectively than argument ever could. A simple habit can anchor this power. 5 minutes of intentional silence each day, without phone, without distraction, without noise. In that practice, you learn to master not just external silence, but internal silence. The result is strength that cannot be shaken when tested. And when you practice this daily, you notice the world no longer controls your state of mind. The noise outside loses its grip because the power to respond rests fully in your hands. The final reflection: owning your silence. At the end of this journey, the difference stands clear. Stoic silence is strength. It is the discipline to remain steady when others lose control, the courage to choose clarity over chaos. Narcissistic silence is control, but not of the self. It is control over others, built on fear and confusion. One protects, the other imprisons. Your task is to decide which silence you will allow to shape your life. Will you cultivate the silence that strengthens your spirit, or will you surrender to the silence that drains it? This choice is not abstract. It is lived out in every pause, every unanswered provocation, every moment when words could be spoken but don't need to be. The journey from victim to master begins with awareness, but ends with practice. Each time you refuse to be shaken by toxic withdrawal, you grow stronger. Each time you sit with your own silence, you grow deeper. Over time, silence ceases to be an enemy and becomes your closest ally. Protect your mind. Do not feed the silence designed to weaken you. Walk away from the games that depend on your reaction. Choose instead the silence that builds resilience, that shields your peace, that makes your presence felt without words. Picture yourself standing tall, calm, and unshaken while chaos rages around you. That is the image of true silent power. A fortress within, a clarity that no storm can reach. This is the invitation. Live the Stoic way. Let silence serve you, not break you. Build a discipline that makes you untouchable to manipulation and unmovable in your purpose. Before you leave, share in the comments your city and country. Let's see how far this community of inner strength extends, uniting people from across the world in the practice of silent power. Because once you understand silence, you no longer fear it. You wield it.